It made a refreshing change for me to visit Lisbonne, Portugal, for the first time for the Grand Prix at Monsoto. The main straight was one half of the dual carriageway road between Estoril and Lisbon. The rest of the circuit was in an adjacent park. This was the first Formula One race there, so few of the drivers knew anything of the circuit beforehand, although Stirling Moss was a notable exception to that. Once more, Roy Salvadori and Carroll Shelby were down to drive the Aston Martins. If you play your cards right, you might finish this one, Carroll, mused Roy. They don't play gin rummy in Sweden, so Joe Bonnier was learning the rules. Eric Hine oversaw some last-minute modifications to the Aston's bonnet. David Brown's foray into Formula One had not reaped rewards. Certainly they were not having the same success that they were used to having in sports cars. Ferraris were entered for Tony Brooks, Dan Gurney and Phil Hill. Ferrari driver Jean Behra had sadly been killed earlier in the month in a sports car race at the German Grand Prix meeting in Avus. And big Dan Gurney had been drafted into the Ferrari team to take his place. There were now 5 Americans in Grand Prix racing, almost 1/3 of the 16-strong Portuguese Grand Prix entry. Rob Walker entered Cooper Climaxes for Stirling Moss and Maurice Trintignant. The Works Coopers were driven by Jack Brabham, Maston Gregory and Bruce McLaren. The BRM drivers were Joe Bonnier, Harry Schell and Ron Flockhart. Tony Brooks arrived for the final practice session at 6:30 on the Friday evening. BRM boss Raymond Mays was there with Mr. and Mrs. David Brown. Moss set pole position a full 2 seconds ahead of Brabham's Works Cooper Climax. After his win at Aintree, Brabham had to give best to the Ferraris in the German Grand Prix on the high-speed Avus track in Berlin. Tony Brooks had led home a Ferrari 1-2-3 there and now had 23 points in the championship to Brabham's 28. The final place on the front row of the grid in Portugal was taken by Maston Gregory's Cooper. The second row comprised Maurice Trintignant, also in a Cooper, and Joe Bonnier, his BRM being the fastest of the front-engine cars. The Ferraris of Dan Gurney and Phil Hill were on the third row, with Bruce McLaren in the third Works Cooper. Roy Salvadori in car number 10 qualified in 12th, just a little quicker than teammate Carroll Shelby in 13th. The Astons were over 10 seconds off the pace of Moss's Cooper. To avoid the hottest part of the August day, the race was started at 5 p.m. on Sunday. Lined up for the 62-lap race, I spotted the Works Ferraris, 2 of the 3 Works Coopers, and Rob Walker's Coopers. Moss got a poor start. Coming down the hill on the first lap, Brabham led from Gregory with Stirling third. At the back of the field was Brooks, who'd been left behind at the start. Within half a lap, Moss had got into the lead. The Astons were unfortunately outclassed. On the second lap, Phil Hill spun and was then collected by his namesake, Graham Hill. Later, Brabham lost control, hit a telegraph pole and was thrown out of the car. Maston Gregory narrowly avoided running over him, but went on to take second, and McLaren was now third, followed by the duelling pair of Gurney in the Ferrari and Trintignant in the second Rob Walker Cooper. Neither the Astons nor the BRMs were in contention at all. Brooks tried to make up ground after his tardy start. Bruce McLaren soon retired with clutch failure. The race had now become, in effect, a demonstration by the master, Stirling Moss. He was leading completely unchallenged. The Gurney-Trintignant battle provided the only close racing. Gurney eventually pulled away, but his Ferrari showed signs of a brush with the scenery. When Moss started his final tour, he had already lapped the entire field. Stirling won a comprehensive victory from Gregory, Gurney and Trintignant. Though after a bad start to the season, plagued by retirements, Moss was overjoyed to win his first Grand Prix of 1959, and he had moved into third place in the championship, 5 points behind Tony Brooks.